She had always lived in the shadows, unseen by the world around her, a small, fragile child who seemed to belong to no one, not even herself. At just 7 years old, she and her younger siblings were left behind at the edge of a dusty, forgotten town, abandoned by parents who had no choice, or perhaps no heart to care for them any longer. The orphanage that took them in was crowded and indifferent, staffed by people who had long since grown numb to the cries of children who shuffled her and her siblings from one room to another like burdens rather than human beings with hearts full of fear and longing. She had no name, not even the comfort of being called something that could anchor her to existence. The very absence of a name made her feel like a ghost, someone who could vanish without anyone noticing or caring. Every morning she would wake in a cold, stiff bed and stare out the window at a world that seemed to move on without her. The laughter of other children outside, cutting through her like a painful reminder that she was different, invisible, and unworthy of attention. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at her stomach, and the chill of loneliness seeped into her bones, making her small body tremble not just from the cold, but from the unspoken despair that settled over her like a heavy, inescapable blanket. Still, despite the hopelessness that surrounded her, there was a spark of something stubborn and persistent inside her chest, tiny ember of hope that refused to be extinguished. She whispered to her baby brother at night, holding him close as if her own heartbeat could shield him from the world's cruelty, promising that someday, somehow, someone would notice, someone would care enough to see them as human beings, not just as abandoned children. This hope, fragile as it was, shaped her days, giving her courage to face the cruelty and neglect around her, to endure the scoffs and harsh words from those who deemed her unworthy. She began to watch the townspeople from afar, noting who spoke kindly to others, who lingered in gentle moments, and imagining what it would feel like if someone treated her that way. In her quiet, solitary way, she nurtured dreams that felt impossibly distant. A warm home, a family who would love her, and a name she could call her own. Each night, as she lay awake on the thin mattress, she would trace imaginary letters in the air, wondering what it would feel like to have a name spoken aloud, to hear it tied to her existence as if the world acknowledged that she belonged. Though she was small, nameless, and overlooked, that ember of hope made her resilient, giving her a reason to keep surviving, to keep believing that one day, the darkness of abandonment would be broken by someone's light, someone who would see her not as a burden or a shadow, but as a child worthy of love, recognition, and a place in the world. And in that quiet, unspoken longing, her story still waiting to be rewritten, began its slow, inevitable unfolding toward the life she was meant to have. Miles from the town, where she huddled with her siblings, a quiet rancher lived a life of solitude on his sprawling land, where the rhythm of nature and the steady work of tending cattle filled his days. He was a man of few words, known in town as serious, even stern, a figure who rarely engaged in the gossip and chatter that filled the dusty streets yet. Beneath the rough exterior lay a heart that had been shaped by both hardship and a deep unspoken kindness. He had long since learned to find comfort in the simplicity of his ranch, the smell of fresh hay, the lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the tall grasses, and he took pride in the small routines that connected him to the land. Yet he was not blind to the struggles beyond its borders. One crisp morning, as he rode into town for supplies, he noticed a group of children gathered near the orphanage, their faces pale, their clothes worn and threadbare, their eyes carrying the weight of neglect and despair. Most people hurried past, indifferent to their plight, but something in him shifted when his gaze fell upon the smallest of them, a girl with haunting eyes that seemed to plead silently for a glimpse of compassion. There was a fragility in the way she clutched her younger brother, a tenderness born from necessity and fear, and it struck him with unexpected force. For reasons he could not fully explain, he found himself slowing his horse, studying her closely, his heart responding to a quiet urgency he had long forgotten existed in his life. Without fanfare or announcement, he dismounted and approached her, careful to appear gentle, aware that sudden movements might frighten a child already accustomed to being overlooked and dismissed. He extended a loaf of bread he had bought for his own breakfast, offering it with a simple, sincere smile that carried no judgment, no condescension, only acknowledgement. The girl stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief, as though such an act of kindness was impossible, unearned, or imaginary. Her trembling hands accepted the bread, and a faint, cautious smile curved her lips, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Day after day, he returned, bringing food, warm clothes, and a quiet presence that never demanded anything in return. Never asked questions she was not ready to answer. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, trust began to grow between them. A fragile bond forged in small gestures that communicated more than words ever could. She began to understand that there were people who saw her, not as a burden or a shadow, but as a child with a heart and a future worth investing in. And for the rancher, each return visit stirred something unexpected instinct, a recognition that his life, solitary as it had been, had room for something more profound, something that could ripple outward in ways neither of them yet imagined. In this quiet intersection of their lives, the first seeds of change were sown. The girl began to hope again, and the rancher began to recognize the extraordinary power of simple, unassuming acts of kindness, knowing that this small connection could alter the course of both their lives in ways neither could yet foresee. The bond between the quiet rancher and the small nameless girl deepened with each passing day, built on gestures that spoke louder than words, warm blankets, on cold nights extra rations of food, gentle guidance as she navigated the world she had long been denied. And yet one question lingered in the rancher's mind, a question that carried more weight than any material provision. Who was she really? One afternoon, after weeks of careful observation and tentative trust, he knelt beside her in the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight, the warmth of the day spilling over the dusty town streets, and asked gently, almost hesitantly, "What should I call you?" The question hung in the air like a fragile promise, and for a long moment she froze, her small fingers fidgeting nervously, because no one had ever asked her to claim a name, to acknowledge her existence in the way that naming a person does. "I don't have one," she whispered, her voice trembling as if admitting it aloud might make it painfully real. The confession struck him with unexpected force, and in that instant, the depth of her invisibility, the weight of her abandonment, became undeniably clear. With quiet determination, he smiled, his eyes soft but firm, and said, "Then you'll have mine." Those words, spoken with simplicity and unwavering intent, were more than a gift. They were a lifeline, a declaration that she mattered, that she was no longer a shadow, no longer a child drifting through the world without identity or belonging. In that moment she felt a strange, almost dizzying combination of relief, disbelief, and joy, as if the emptiness that had defined her life for so long could finally be filled with something tangible, enduring, and unconditionally loving. She repeated the name aloud, testing its sound on her tongue, and for the first time, it felt like hers, not given out of necessity or obligation, but bestowed with care, respect, and hope. It was more than a name, it was the first thread of connection to a life she had only dared to imagine, a key to the door that would eventually lead to home, family, and the sense of belonging that every child deserves. From that day forward, she walked a little taller, spoke a little louder, and laughed a little more freely, carrying with her the knowledge that someone had chosen her, had seen her worth, and had invested in her future when the world had not. The rancher, for his part, watched with quiet pride as she transformed before his eyes, recognizing that this simple act of naming a word, a sound, a symbol of acknowledgement, had the extraordinary power to restore dignity, ignite hope, and change a life forever. The small girl who had once been invisible now had an identity, a foundation, and the first glimmer of a life that could be shaped not by abandonment and fear, but by love, guidance, and the unwavering belief that she was worthy of care. And in that sunlit afternoon, as her eyes sparkled with tentative joy and her small hands clutched his in trust, both of them understood that a single act of kindness, a single decision to see and honor a child, had set in motion a journey that would forever alter the trajectory of her life, turning her from a nameless orphan into someone cherished, seen, and profoundly valued. Moving to the ranch was both thrilling and overwhelming for the young girl whose entire life until then had been defined by neglect, abandonment, and the cold indifference of a world that refused to see her. Suddenly she was surrounded by wide-open fields, endless skies, and the rhythmic pulse of life on the land where cattle roamed freely, and the scent of hay mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil. Every sound, the lowing of the animals, the rustle of the wind through the tall grasses, the soft creak of wooden fences, was new and unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting, as if nature itself was offering her a quiet welcome. The rancher, ever patient and gentle, guided her through these first days, with a combination of firm instruction and unwavering support, showing her how to feed the animals, mend fences, and tend to the chores that made the ranch not just a home but a living, breathing entity in which she could participate and belong. More importantly, he taught her lessons that no orphanage could ever provide. Lessons about patience, responsibility, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from nurturing others. At first, the girl struggled, often fumbling tasks, tripping over her own inexperience, and feeling the familiar pangs of inadequacy that had haunted her since she was abandoned. Yet the rancher's presence was steady and non-judgmental. He corrected her mistakes without anger, praised her small successes, and allowed her to learn at her own pace, creating a space where she could grow without fear of ridicule or rejection. Slowly, the fear that had become her constant companion began to loosen its grip. She laughed for the first time in years, a sound so pure and unburdened that it seemed to echo across the wide fields, mingling with the soft breeze, as if the land itself were celebrating her newfound joy. Evenings were spent by the fire, where the rancher shared stories of his own youth, of challenges overcome and lessons learned, and she listened wide-eyed, absorbing not only the tales themselves, but the warmth and safety they represented, a stark contrast to the harshness and neglect that had defined her earliest memories. In these moments, she began to imagine a future she had never dared to envision. A life where she could belong, where she could be useful, loved, and capable of shaping her own destiny. She explored the ranch with cautious curiosity, discovering hidden nooks among the barns, secret trails through the trees, and the quiet joy of companionship with the animals that, unlike humans she had known before, never judged her or dismissed her worth. The ranch became her sanctuary, a place where her small heart could learn trust, her mind could learn wonder, and her spirit could learn courage. Each day brought new experiences and small triumphs, building her confidence in ways the orphanage never could. And slowly, imperceptibly, at first she began to shed the layers of fear, shame, and invisibility that had clung to her for so long. The girl realized, perhaps for the first time, that she was not just a child in need of rescue. She was capable, resilient, and deserving of love, and that, through the patience, guidance, and unwavering kindness of the rancher, she was beginning to grow into a young woman who could face the world with hope rather than despair. In this nurturing, sunlit life on the ranch, the first true chapters of her story unfolded, a story in which she was no longer nameless, no longer invisible, and slowly, steadily, learning to become cherished. The rancher's kindness did not end with the small, nameless girl. Once he had given her a name, a sense of belonging, and a safe place to grow, his thoughts inevitably turned to her siblings, who had been left behind in the orphanage, surviving as best they could under the weight of neglect and abandonment. He understood that true family was not complete until they were all together, and so, with the quiet determination that had defined every action of his life, he made the decision to bring them home to the ranch. The reunion was tentative at first, fraught with fear, hesitation, and disbelief, as the children stared at each other, wondering if this sudden change was real. If the kind man who had rescued their sister could truly offer them the same warmth, safety, and love. Their initial mistrust was understandable. Years of neglect had taught them to be wary of kindness, to expect disappointment, and to protect themselves by building walls around their hearts. Yet the rancher's patience was endless. He approached them not with demands or expectations, but with the same gentle presence he had shown their sister, allowing them to acclimate at their own pace. Slowly, through small gestures, a warm meal, a soft word of encouragement, a moment of shared laughter, he began to break down the barriers the children had erected around themselves. The girl watched in awe as her siblings, once frightened and withdrawn, began to emerge from the shadows, their laughter blending with hers as they explored the wide fields, learned to care for the animals, and discovered the routines that made the ranch a home. There were challenges, of course. Quarrels erupted, tears were shed, and moments of doubt and frustration threatened to undo their fragile progress. Yet each obstacle was met with calm guidance and unwavering support from the rancher, who understood that healing was not linear and that the scars of abandonment could not be erased overnight. Gradually, the children began to see themselves not as neglected or unwanted but as integral members of a family, each with a place, a role, and a value that had always existed, waiting only for recognition and care to flourish. Together, they learned the joys of shared work and mutual support, discovering that life on the ranch was not just about chores and survival, but about connection, trust, and love. The girl, who had once clutched her baby brother in fearful whispers at night, now held his hand with pride, sharing smiles and laughter that had once been impossible to imagine. The rancher, watching the siblings interact, felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his choice to bring them together had created not just a family, but a sanctuary, a space where love and guidance replaced neglect and fear. In this reunited family, the children found a sense of identity and belonging they had never known, each day reinforcing the knowledge that they were seen, valued, and cherished. The ranch, once simply a place of work and solitude, had transformed into a home alive with the sounds of laughter, the bonds of trust, and the warmth of compassion, proving that one person's kindness could ripple outward to heal not just one life, but an entire family, turning abandonment into reunion and despair into hope. As the years passed, the girl, once a nameless, frightened child, abandoned at the edge of town, grew into a strong, resilient young woman, her spirit shaped not only by the trials of her early life, but also by the steady guidance, patience, and unwavering kindness of the rancher who had given her a name, a home, and a sense of belonging. Yet growth was not without struggle, for the scars of abandonment and neglect ran deep, manifesting in moments of doubt, insecurity, and fear that threatened to overshadow the courage she had painstakingly built. She sometimes caught herself questioning her worth, wondering if she truly belonged, or if the love she had received was somehow conditional, fleeting, or fragile. And in these moments, she would retreat to quiet corners of the ranch, seeking solace in the rhythmic sounds of the animals, the rustling trees, and the familiar scent of hay and earth that had become her sanctuary. But the rancher, ever observant, never let her doubt fester. He met her fears with gentle reassurance, guidance through challenges, and the quiet insistence that her abilities, her heart, and her courage were more than enough. Through daily life on the ranch, feeding animals, mending fences, tending gardens, and learning the practical skills that gave her confidence and self-reliance, she discovered a growing sense of mastery over the world, a realization that she was capable of contributing, of caring, and of making a difference not just for herself but for the life she now shared with her siblings and the animals she had come to cherish. Alongside these practical lessons came the deeper, more endearing lessons of empathy, resilience, and moral courage. She learned that true strength was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with compassion despite it. That kindness, once extended, could ripple outward in ways she could scarcely imagine, and that her past, though painful, did not define her, but rather equipped her with insight, empathy, and determination that could help others facing hardship. She found herself drawn to moments where she could nurture those smaller, more vulnerable than herself, an injured calf, a frightened child, a bird fallen from its nest, and, in giving care, she discovered a profound sense of purpose, a reminder of the love and protection the rancher had given her, and the responsibility she now carried to pass it forward. Each success, each act of courage or kindness, chipped away at the lingering shadows of her past, gradually transforming the girl who had once clutched her baby brother in fear into a young woman of quiet confidence, compassion, and integrity. And the rancher, watching her from a distance, sometimes with pride, sometimes with awe, understood that his simple act of naming her and taking her in had unleashed a potential he could never have imagined. A young woman who not only survived her past, but thrived because of it, who carried kindness in her heart, strength in her hands, and the resolve to create light where once there had been only darkness. Through growing pains, mistakes, triumphs, and tender moments, she came to embody resilience, showing that even the most fragile beginnings could evolve into extraordinary strength, and that a life once defined by abandonment could blossom into one defined by courage, love, and unwavering hope. As the girl blossomed into a strong, confident young woman, the impact of the rancher's kindness extended far beyond the borders of their home, rippling outward into the town and the wider community in ways neither of them could have anticipated. People began to take notice of the once nameless child who had been abandoned and left to survive on the margins of society, now walking with quiet confidence, speaking with warmth and empathy, and demonstrating a generosity of spirit that was impossible to ignore. Her story, initially whispered among neighbors, gradually spread, inspiring others to reflect on their own attitudes toward the forgotten and overlooked, showing them that even small acts of compassion could create profound change. The orphanage, which had once seemed like a place of hopelessness and indifference, began to experience the effects of this transformation, as volunteers inspired by her journey arrived to offer care, attention, and a renewed sense of purpose to children who had previously been overlooked, creating a ripple effect that elevated not just one life, but many. Families who had once ignored or dismissed children in need found themselves reconsidering what it meant to nurture, to protect, and to value those who seemed invisible, while local townspeople who had grown accustomed to passing by, suffering without notice, began to act with greater awareness and empathy, offering small gestures of kindness, support, and encouragement to those struggling around them. The girl, guided by the lessons she had learned on the ranch, became a quiet leader within this shift. Her presence, a living example of the transformative power of care, love, and opportunity. She spent her days mentoring younger children, tending to animals, helping her siblings, and modeling resilience, patience, and compassion in every interaction, teaching those around her that being seen, acknowledged, and loved could awaken the best qualities in anyone. The rancher, witnessing this transformation, understood that his simple acts rescuing a nameless child, giving her a name, and providing a home had created something far larger than either of them could have imagined. A movement of empathy that began in a single act but now shaped an entire community, touching lives that he would never meet and inspiring actions he could scarcely measure. Slowly the town itself began to change its streets, becoming warmer, its people kinder, and its children more hopeful, as if the ripple of one child's transformation could soften even the hardest hearts and awaken the dormant compassion within others. The girl realized, often with quiet awe, that her own journey from abandonment to belonging had become a beacon for others, that the pain she had endured was not wasted but had been transformed into the ability to understand suffering, extend care, and ignite change. She saw that kindness, once given freely and without expectation, had a power far beyond her imagination. It could restore families, reshape communities, and rewrite the futures of countless lives. And as she walked through the town helping, guiding, and smiling at neighbors who had once ignored her existence, she felt the profound truth that one person's love, courage, and dedication could indeed change, not just one life but the lives of many, creating a legacy that honored the quiet, steadfast generosity of the rancher who had once seen a nameless girl and decided to care. Years had passed since the nameless little girl had first been abandoned, and now standing on the sunlit fields of the ranch, she was no longer a child defined by fear, neglect, or invisibility, but a young woman whose heart, courage, and kindness had been nurtured into something extraordinary. The journey from those cold, lonely nights at the orphanage to this moment of belonging had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had been shaped by the unwavering presence of the rancher, who had first seen her, given her a name, and offered her a home, and by the siblings who had been reunited with her, creating a family bound not by blood alone, but by love, trust, and shared experiences. As she walked beside the rancher, feeling the familiar crunch of the earth beneath her boots and the gentle breeze carrying the scent of hay and open fields, she reflected on how much her life had changed, how the small acts of care, guidance, and patience had transformed not only her circumstances, but her sense of self, her ability to love, and her understanding of what it truly meant to be cherished. She realized that the name he had given her so many years ago was more than a word. It was a symbol of acceptance, of acknowledgement, and of the belief that she mattered. A belief that had become the foundation upon which she built her strength, her compassion, and her resilience. She looked at him with gratitude, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and whispered softly, "You gave me everything I never had: love, family, and a name. I will carry it forever." The rancher, in his quiet, steadfast way, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his eyes reflecting pride, affection, and the gentle satisfaction of a man who had witnessed a life transformed by care, patience, and unwavering commitment. She now understood that being cherished was not merely about being protected or provided for, it was about being seen, valued, and given the chance to grow into the person she was always meant to be. And that the love and kindness she had received could now flow outward, touching others, creating ripples of hope and compassion in ways she had never imagined. Around them the ranch thrived with life. Her siblings laughed and played, the animals moved contentedly across the fields, and the town, influenced by the ripple effects of the rancher's initial act of kindness, had become a place more aware, more compassionate, and more willing to care for the vulnerable. In that moment she felt the profound certainty that her life had been rewritten, that the darkness of her earliest days had been replaced by a light so warm, enduring, and encompassing that it could carry her forward into any future with confidence and joy. She had become not just a survivor but a beacon of hope, embodying the lessons of love, empathy, and courage that had been quietly instilled in her, and she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always remember that she was cherished, not for what she could do, but for who she was, a child once forgotten, now seen, valued, and profoundly loved. In the glow of the evening sun, as the wind whispered through the fields and her family gathered close, she understood with absolute clarity that the simple, steadfast generosity of one man had changed the trajectory of her life, forever turning abandonment into belonging, loneliness into love, and a nameless girl into a cherished daughter, whose heart would forever carry the imprint of kindness.